recommend on the pre-finishing side, there's basically two choices. I mean, the first choice is obvious. You really should pre-finish. Your choice is 3 sides or 4 sides at that point. You want to pre-finish 3 sides, install it with the face up on the deck raw, and finish it after you're completely done with your installation. Or you can pre-finish all 4 sides, and if you're doing a clip system and it's not a very big deck, like we've got a couple like the balcony decks that you'll see where there aren't any lengths over 12 feet or whatever, you can run full-length courses, no butt joints, no sanding. You can pre-finish all 4 sides, clean installation, sweep it off and walk away when you're done. That's probably not the majority of them. The majority of them that we do in real life, it's unusual to have a perfect installation where there's no need to break out any oil after installation. So we usually err on the side of let's pre-finish 3 sides, get it down, and then deal with creating more of like a dining room floor experience in the end for the customer.
The way we approach it when we talk to our customers, I'm going to put the same care into your deck that I would put in your dining room floor. Because in the end, you probably spent more on the deck than the dining room floor. And you want it to last, and you want to be able to go out in your stocking feet or your bare feet, and it feels nice.
What it actually adds in cost in the context of an overall project is pretty minimal for the gain that you get in long-term performance out of the product. All penetrating oils are not created the same. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And when we try to educate our clients about the different grades of oils, everybody seems to relate to like beer and wine. Oils to us, penetrating oils are like beers. There's mass-produced Budweiser type of beers that you can get pretty much anywhere. You know what you're going to get. It's pretty cheap and readily available, which is convenient, and that's why people buy that kind of beer or go to McDonald's or whatever. It's just, it's familiar, you know what you're going to get, and you can get it, and the price is reasonable. The product determines the process. The product that you choose drives the way that you have to use it. And Penafin, any of the Penafin flavors that you would get, and they're everywhere. Your lumberyard, your suppliers, your hardware stores, paint stores, they've all got Penafin. If you're using a Penafin, you have to wipe it. If you put Penafin down, even if you put it down thin, and you don't wipe it out with a rag, it's going to penetrate immediately to a certain point. And the amount that doesn't penetrate, which is going to be a considerable amount, no matter how thin you thought you went, it's going to sit there and just get sticky.
It feels just like flypaper.
And that's one of the categories of the emergency IPE calls that we get is, oops, somebody put it on Friday, it's now next Wednesday, and it's still sticky, we can't walk on it.
When we say it's sticky, it dries sticky. Like it's not still wet. That's what you've got now.
It's like tacky. So and that is an incredibly stressful call. The person on the other end of the phone who's got the tacky deck that they just spent 80 grand on that they can't walk on, and there's a barbecue scheduled for Saturday, we have a real problem. And it can happen not just with Penafin, but any oil that needs to be wiped that doesn't get wiped will do this to you. Will just dry tacky like that. There is a product, a chemical detergent called trisodium phosphate, TSP. It comes in powder form. You can get it at hardware stores or whatever. So it's called TSP.
It'll knock it down.
Yeah, what you do, it's a powder that you just mix in water, and you got to get down on your hands and knees, put some gloves on, and get the Scotch-Brite sponges out and scrub it. But TSP will cut that tacky, half-dried oil factor.
Yeah.
So our state just adopted the new EPA with the low VOCs. Did you notice the difference when we went from 500 to 250? You notice performance differences?
Yeah, generally, the higher VOC products are generally better.
I thought so.
Scary.
Should have bought a bunch of.
At this point, generally, if you live in California, your choices are much more limited. California is usually the first on board, with the lower VOC stuff. So when we have clients in California, they have a harder time getting good product. But to your question, which one is our favorite? Which one do we recommend? Well, in general, that decision, product selection for how to finish your IPE, is a discussion that should happen as early as you can get it into the discussion with the client, because sampling becomes part of the game. When your batch of IPE arrives, you're going to cut off some pieces like this, and literally you want to sample a product and show it to the customer. This is raw. We're going to put some oil on it in a few minutes, but you oil a piece and hold it up in front of your customer and say, you know, would you like your deck to look like this? Because they need to know what to expect. And if you don't sample it and put it right in front of them ahead of time, you go ahead and oil the deck, they don't like the look of it, you're not gonna end up with a happy customer. So how do you decide which ones to sample? Number one criteria a lot of the time is availability. If the downside to a product like Armstrong Clark or Ready Seal, because they're microbrews in the oil world, we could get on a bus right now and drive all over Chicago. We won't probably find a can of either one, and this is a huge market. You know, what I want you guys to understand about these penetrating oils, they come in any of these, all of these products that we're talking about, with the possible exception of Penafin, they come in a transparent, they come in a semi-transparent. You can get a semi-solid, you can get a solid. And what those terms refer to is the amount of pigment, the amount of color that's in the base of the oil. With an exotic wood like Ipe or Meranti or any of the exotics, you don't want to introduce much synthetic color to that wood. You want as much oil with the least amount of color. So we refer to it more as like a toning process than a staining process. When people say we want to stain our Ipe, we kind of shudder because it could go a whole bunch of different directions depending on the product you selected. But when we say transparent, that doesn't mean natural. You know, sometimes there's confusion where people think, oh yeah, we just want a transparent, natural look. Transparent has a tone to it, and that tone can be red, it can be brown, it can be dark, it can be white. We've had some of the super deck ones. You can take Ipe and turn it yellow if you want to. You know, that's the architecturally, if that's the look that your designer, your customer, your architect wants. You can tone the wood and manipulate its natural tone, but you don't want to go too far away from the natural grain tones of the wood. You want to enhance them in a tone. So color selection, you know, your question is really good because any oil that you put on Ipe is going to look good at first. We could take the ones we don't like Cabot, Australian timber oil, put them on Ipe, they're going to look great. The reason that we don't like them is not because they're ugly, it's the way they perform. You know, some customers at that level who are putting 60 grand into a deck, they'll tell you, we don't like the look of red. We don't want our Ipe to look red because our house is brown. A red deck on a brown house is going to look weird. Can you manipulate the Ipe to make it look more brown? Yes, you can. So color tone and availability are two of the immediate things you've got to look at because you don't want to get held up by product. You want to sample things that you can actually get.
So would you actually have, say, 6 different tones to be able to
Try to keep it as simple as you can, but
that's what I would think.
in discussion with whoever's in charge, whether it's the homeowner or the architect or a designer, or whoever's involved in that final decision-making process, verbally try to narrow it down and show them pictures like this. You know, do you like a mixed-looking deck? Do you like to see some variety of tones, which a lot of people do. They like to see a mixture of tones. Do you like to see it more on the red side? Do you like it more on the brown side? You know, what's going on with the house itself? You know, you want it to be integrated into the style of the house, and the tone that you choose can be manipulated to achieve that. So try to keep it as simple as 2 options. This one or this one?
Application process. The reason we're making a big deal of this is because the two, actually all 3 of those on the top, I put a line between Penafin because that's kind of the don't use for us now. All 3 of those will say you can brush it, you can roll it, you can spray it. Please don't spray or roll oil. Just for the overspray factor of what you're throwing out into the air, and you're missing the boards with the spray, and it tends to splatter. So if you're next to a house, even a pump sprayer is a little hard to control at times, and you can roll and spray faster than you can usually brush, and if you roll or spray, you got to brush it in anyways, or it gets kind of funny looking. So just get down on your hands and knees with the brush. You're going to be able to manually manipulate it into the wood better anyways. You'll see spots. You can get in between the boards really well. And it kind of gives you an idea. You can see better how much you're putting on. You can make sure it's more even because you're a lot closer to the product.
The other question with this is, like the one deck you were showing that looks all wet.
Yep.
Expose your sun while you're doing it. Like my deck face south, you know, is that an issue because then the sun hits it, dries it quicker than it would? So
It isn't so much the exposure as the heat. if it's been 110 degrees all week and you show up at that deck and you put your hand on it, you're like, ooh, it's not a good idea with any product. If it's that hot, it's gonna try to cure the product too fast. It's still gonna brush out evenly, but you're gonna see it's gonna get sticky, just like as if you were using paint.
That when IPE heats up, it has like an artificial opening. The grain opens and will take more oil when it's hot. So it like artificially accepts more than it's really willing to accept. So it'll take more when it's hot, and as it cools off, it'll start to bleed it back out. You'll see that in situations if it's applied too hot, it'll accept a whole bunch, and when the temperature sort of levels back out and cools off a little bit, it starts to leach.
It'll look like the grain is sweating.
Yeah, so next day you'll show up and it's kind of spotted. You can wipe it out, you know, it's not really cured, but it's bleeding. The answer to the IPE question, the one answer that if you're going to take one thing out of this class and bring it back to your customers going forward, anybody who's considering an IPE deck, if they want it to look good and to hold up good, it's annual maintenance. There's just no other trick, there's no other secret to it than it just has to be maintained annually.
On the left, that's Scott pressure washing it after we did the first chemical wash on it to get it back. And now we're actually doing the brightening right there with the pressure washer just to get the colors to come back. This is what happens on the left if you put a deck in and don't do anything for 14 years. Okay, that's 14 years old. We cleaned it, brightened it, washed it. But this was what the wood that rotted on it turned to. This is a piece off of it. And it's, pass that around, it's IPE's heavy. It's a dense wood. That feels like balsa. And
the piece that you're passing around
is right where Scott's pointing.
right through here. We replaced like 8 pieces on that deck.
But that was a case where they did like the other deck. They didn't put spaces between it. However, they pre-oiled it.
This is the
You look
piece
at
that
the
we took
piece.
off it.
It's pre-oiled on the bottom, but they never oiled it again. Because somebody told them, you got IPE, we oiled it, you're set. And they said, okay, we got IPE, we're set.
As long as it's not rotten, IPE can be brought back, you know, from any stage of deterioration that you find it in.
So even though perhaps the bottom or the 3 sides were never done originally?
Well, you'll see in that case, that may not necessarily create a rot hazard. If it's still properly ventilated underneath and can breathe, that won't necessarily make it rot, but it'll cup it. And once the wood cups, it holds more moisture, you know, rain and whatnot, which causes it to split and check, which causes it to hold more moisture. So, you know, but still, even in a cup state, you know, that might be a situation where you come in with your upright sander and try to flatten out the cups. And when IPE gets old, you know, it's so oily to begin with. The natural oils in it are amazing, which makes it hard for it to take more. That's why it's hard to oil, you know, artificially. But it does dry out over time. You know, within 5 to 10 years in any kind of exposure, it's lost most of its natural oil and becomes somewhat brittle, which makes it great for re-oiling because it'll take oil at that point. And when it gets to that cupped brittle stage, you can actually sand it flat. I mean, you may have to go down to 40 grit or 24 grit on a pretty powerful sander, but you can flatten those cups back out and load it back up with oil and start from scratch.
So you know, you guys have ever worked with cedar that's cupped and you sand it. The highlights on the side, where we call them the highlights, will turn kind of a bright pink. The middle will kind of stay whatever that brown cedar is. So you wind up highlighting your whole deck. Nice part about IPE, IPE will look like it's doing that, but if you're using a penetrating oil, the color will come back and even, which is nice. You don't get those bright pink stripes down the middle of your deck. It'll all even back out. Yeah, it was,
On the new installation, on some of the screen porches that we do, sometimes we'll take our floor guys doing the interior, take it as a buffer and have them just put a sanding screen on it.
Yep.
And run over that T&G.
Yep.
Would that work from a maintenance standpoint as well? When we go back, say it's a screen porch that's covered, very little sun, 3 to 5 years later go back, would that be a good?
as long as he doesn't just create scratches. That's the only issue. As long as he's good enough that he can float and not scratch it, because once you oil it, you're going to highlight the scratches. But other than that, yeah.
Okay.
A lot of guys will do the screen and then buff beyond anyway, just to make sure. But yeah, that would work.
Would
you guys say, I mean, you've mentioned a few times that you work in the Northeast or from Vermont. Would you say these tips apply nationwide, or does ePay, react differently in the humid Southwest versus or Southeast versus the dry Southwest versus?
It weathers
Pacific
differently.
Northwest?
We have clients that we consult in regions, Hawaii, California, very, very different regions. Like California decks are a lot drier. They don't get very much rain. They get a lot of sun. So the ePay weathers differently. It's much more likely to, in a desirable way, to fade rather than to get mildew, darkening, turning black. They don't really turn black out there because there's not so much moisture. They tend to fade out, which kind of makes them easier to maintain because the oils, the penetrating oils, all of them, even the bad ones that we're talking about, they're designed to fade. They don't peel, they don't flake, they don't fail like a Sikkens does. They fade out. And when an oil fades out, it's actually doing what you want it to do. And when the wood doesn't darken from moisture and mildew formation, it doesn't gather organic matter and accelerate at the same rate, as a moist deck would. So a drier deck is actually easier to maintain and takes oil better.
If they go too far, I used to live in Colorado, if the deck does go too far, is not being maintained, ePay will start getting surface cracks in it. They're
Which you
real
can see, the
fine.
piece we just handed around has those.
Has got
Yeah.
little tiny surface cracks. Putting oil back in that, the wood's never going to re-swell back together, but it will penetrate into those cracks and actually seal it so that it is protected.
So then moisture at least can't get deeper in.
You're not, it would be a while, like the decks on my house in Colorado, I was never worried they were going to rot like from moisture more than dry rot because they didn't have enough moisture in them.